like it's just a snippet.
Yeah.
It's just a snippet. It's not going to be the main. It's going to be
it's okay.
cookies. Jessica.
We go.
Krista.
Hi everyone. My name is Paul. Hi. And today this is my video presentation and I'm responsible for question 1. So let's look at the preface. The outline is the United States has suffered from the inflation problems, and so it has affected a lot of Asian countries such as Taiwan, Japan. So let's look at the first question. The first question is, what is federal funds rate and what are federal funds rates being kept at a very high level in the United States? So the answer is, federal fund rate is an interest rate at which the depository institutions such as banks and credit unions lend reserve balance to other depository institutions overnight on an uncollateralized basis. So why federal fund rate has been kept at a very high level? Because US has still suffered from inflation. The second question is, what is discount rate and why the Central Bank of Taiwan increased its discount rate to deal with the inflation problem in March? The answer is the discount rate is the interest rate the Federal Reserve charges commercial banks and other financial institutions for short-term loans. So an increase in discount rates makes it less profitable for banks to borrow from the Federal Reserve. As banks reduce their borrowing, the total reserve of bank systems are reduced, and the money supply by the banking system will decline, and which will decrease the inflation. And the third question is, what is real exchange rate? And we use the open microeconomics model to explain why capital flows has caused real exchange rate to rise in USA. So the answer is the real exchange rate is the exchange rate between countries that take into account the price level difference between these countries. And that's our graphs. So this is the question analyzed. The US net capital has decreased. So you can see the graphs. The US net capital outflow decrease. So the interest rate will get higher. So you can see the supply of the dollar to be exchanged will decrease. So the real exchange rate rise. You can see this move along the line. Okay, this is the market of foreign currency exchange. So let's go to the fourth question. What is nominal exchange rate? And draw a diagram for Tokyo's foreign currencies interest market. On this diagram, the vertical axis is Japanese yen per US dollar, whereas the horizontal axis is the quantity of US dollars. Identify factors affecting the demand curve and supply curve on this question. So we say the nominal exchange rate is defined as the number of units of the domestic currency that can purchase a unit of given foreign currency. And let's look at the diagram. So you can see the diagram, exchange rate, the quantity of US dollars, and I think the factor is government policy and of course the net capital outflow. And let's look at the fifth question. Suppose that in initial equilibrium nominal exchange rate was 150 Japanese yen per US dollars on April 28, and show my continuous capital outflow from Japan caused nominal exchange rate to rise to 160 Japanese yen per US dollar on April 29. Explain how Central Bank of Japan pulled the nominal exchange rate down to 155 Japanese yen per US dollar in the end of that day. So we still need to draw a graphical analyze. So let's look at analyze. First, we can talk about the continuous capital outflow. Continuous capital outflow from the Japanese implies an increased supply of yen in the foreign exchange market. Therefore, this is increased supply of yen leads to a shift in the supply curve to the right, and the new supply curve intersects the demand curve at higher exchange rate. So you can see the B. So we can see the yen move from A to B. And the second part is the government policy. So after the government find this situation, so the Central Bank of Japan can interfere in the foreign exchange market by purchasing the dollars. So this will increase demand for dollar shift the demand curve to the right. And the new equilibrium exchange rates will reach where the supply and the demand curve intersects at 155. So you can see the original point is point B, and after the government policy, point is shift from B to C. So the government successfully control the interest rates of yen. And this is all my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I have some thing to say. I want to say thank you, Jess, for teaching me about thank you, Jess and TAs, for teaching me for the whole year's economics, and I think I learned a lot, and I still have other things to learn. I want to show my appreciation. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Rico Samuel, and I will be answering question 2. Question 2 states, China has experienced a fast economic growth since it opened the doors to the world. The real estate sector has contributed to China's GDP significantly. However, since 2019, China's economy has suffered from threats of several black swans. First, there has been a trade war between USA and China. Second, foreign companies have continued to leave China since the COVID-19 pandemic period. Third, China has been experiencing a real estate crisis, with the collapse of giants like Evergrande and Country Garden. Lastly, China's stock market hits new 5-year low. Number 1. How can trade war between the USA and China influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. A trade war between the USA and China can influence the aggregate demand in China through several channels. Firstly, tariffs imposed on China's exports by the USA can reduce demand for Chinese goods, leading to a decrease in exports and thus a decrease in the aggregate demand. Secondly, uncertainty surrounding trade relations can lead to a decrease in consumer and business confidence, causing a reduction in consumption and investment spending, further reducing the aggregate demand. So basically, there would be a decrease in the aggregate demand due to the trade war reducing export, which directly lowers the aggregate demand. Number 2. How can the leaving of foreign companies influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. The departure of foreign companies from China can affect the aggregate demand in multiple ways. Firstly, it can lead to a decrease in investment spending as foreign companies may withdraw their investments or relocate operations elsewhere. Secondly, it can lead to job losses, reducing consumer spending and further lowering the aggregate demand. So overall, there will be a decrease in the aggregate demand because of the exit of foreign companies, reducing investments, employment, and which lowers the aggregate demand. Number 3. How can real estate crisis influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. A real estate crisis can significantly impact the aggregate demand in China. The collapse of real estate giants like Evergrande and Country Garden can lead to a decrease in construction activities, reducing investment spending. Additionally, a fall in house prices can reduce household wealth, leading to a decrease in consumer spending. Overall, a real estate crisis can lead to a contraction in both investment and consumption spending, reducing the aggregative demand. So in conclusion, the aggregative demand will decrease and the real estate crisis will reduce household wealth, investment. Number 4. How can stock market crash influence the aggregate demand in China? Explain your reasoning. A stock market crash can decrease the aggregate demand in China. A decline in stock prices can reduce household wealth and consumers' confidence, leading to a decrease in consumption spending. Additionally, a stock market crash can lead to a decrease in business investment due to the reduced access to capital and increasing uncertainty about the future economic condition. So, overall, there will be a decrease in the aggregate demand, and the stock market crash reduces wealth and confidence, which also lowers consumption and investments. Number 5. Use appropriate models to analyze the impact of these black swans on China's real GDP and overall price in the short run and in the long run. Graphical and descriptive analysis are required. As you can see, I have attached the graphical appropriate models to show the impact of these black swans on China's real GDP and overall prices. On the y-axis, we have price, and on the x-axis, we have output. We have price at price 1, 2, and 3. The A, B, and C, they indicate the equilibrium. LRAS is the long-run aggregate supply. SRAS is the short-run aggregate supply, and AD are the aggregate demand. In this case, there would be a decrease in the aggregate demand, which causes the output to fall in the short run. However, in the long run, over time, the short-run aggregate supply will shift and the output would return to its natural rate. As you can see in this context, in the short run, the aggregative demand curve will shift to the left due to the reduce in consumption, investments, and net exports. This leads to a lower real GDP and price level. However, in the long run, the economy must adjust through lower wages and prices, shifting the short-run aggregative supply curve right, potentially restoring the real GDP, but at a lower cost. And that would be the descriptive analysis I just read. So, yeah. Number 6. What would you suggest the Chinese government do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans? Explain your reasoning. In response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans, the Chinese government could implement fiscal policies such as increasing the government spending on infrastructure projects to stimulate the aggregate demand. Additionally, target measures to support the affected industries and households could help mitigate the negative impact. So overall, increasing the government spending would directly boost the aggregate demand and can help mitigate the short-run economic fluctuation. Number 7. What would you suggest a General Bank of China to do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by these black swans? The General Bank of China could respond to the short-run economic fluctuation by implementing a monetary policy such as lowering interest rates to stimulate borrowing and investing. Additionally, providing liquidity support to banks and financial institutions can help maintain stability in the financial system amidst the turmoil caused by the black swans. So basically, lowering the interest rate, this can encourage borrowing and investing, which will directly boost the aggregate demand in the short run. And this is the end of question 2. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Hello, my name is Krishna Koch, and today I will be answering question 3 of the economics homework. Question 3 states, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union adopted a number of sanctions in an attempt to immobilize the war effort. One sanction was a complete import ban on all Russian seaborne crude oil and petroleum products. This sanction sent energy prices to historic high. Number 1. Use a graph of energy markets to explain why this sanction caused the energy price to rise sharply. Number 2. How could this sanction affect the overall price in the European Union in the short run? Output unemployment. Graphical and descriptive analysis are required. Number 3. If the European Union Authority would like to solve the inflation problem, what kind of fiscal policy is appropriate for the European Union Authority to implement? Explain why. Number 4. If the European Union Authority would like to solve the recession problem, what kind of monetary policy is appropriate for the European Union Authority to implement? And explain why. And number 5. Could the European Union Authority use a single policy to simultaneously solve both inflation and recession problems? Explain your answer graphically and descriptively. Okay, so question 3.1 asks us to use a graph of energy markets to explain why this sanction caused the energy price to rise sharply. And it's mainly because of the shift of the aggregate supply, but the import ban on crude oil and petroleum products disrupted the supply of these essential energy resources in the market. And this disruption caused the supply of oil and petroleum products to decrease, which led to a leftward shift in the short run aggregate supply curve. And because of this shift on the short run aggregate supply curve, the price rose sharply from P1 to P2, as seen in the graph to the right. We have SRAS1, which is the short run aggregate supply, which was where it was originally in the black line, and then it shifted left to SRAS2. And because of this shift in the aggregate supply, the price rose from P1 to P2. Question 3.2 asks us how could the sanction affect the overall price in the European Union in the short run? This includes output and unemployment. So in the short run, the import ban could lead to an increase in energy costs, which leads to inflation, since businesses will be facing higher production costs. And these costs will affect consumers because they will have to pay a higher price for goods and services. And the disruption in the energy market will lead to a decrease in output and thus will reduce the production and affect other operations because of the higher cost and the shortage in supply. And the decrease in the output will lead to higher unemployment because businesses will be forced to lay off some workers as a way to cope with the higher production cost. And it could be seen here in the graph by the leftward shift in the aggregate supply curve, the short run aggregate supply curve, which is again SRAS1, where it originally was, and then it will shift left to the red one, to SRAS2, which is the red one. And this will also cause the price to rise from P1 to P2, as mentioned before. And the output will also decrease from Q1, where it originally was, to Q2. So so inflation will increase. There will be a decrease in output from Q1 to Q2, a rise in unemployment since businesses will have to lay off workers, and a leftward shift in the short run aggregate supply, and a rising price from P1 to P2. Question 3.3 asks us if the European Union Authority would like to solve the inflation problem, what fiscal policy is most appropriate to implement? So we could implement the reduction in government spending and or increase tax. So a reduction in government spending or reducing government spending will result in less economic activity and thus less money in the economy. And increasing tax would decrease the disposable income and reduce household spendings, which would um, allow the households to purchase again the products. For example, here the purpose would be to move from 81 aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2 to to reach an equilibrium, and the price will then reduce from P2, which is the higher price, to P1, which was the original price, and this will now be P3. So it will be affordable for the households to buy again. 3.4 now asks if the European Authority would like to solve the recession problem, not the inflation problem anymore, what kind of monetary policy is appropriate to implement. So we will implement an increase in money supply, since an increase in money supply will reduce the interest rate and this boosts consumption and investment. So basically, lowering the interest rate or a decrease in interest rate will encourage borrowing and investment, and this will then stimulate the aggregate demand curve and boost economic activity. And because of lower interest rates, this would make borrowing cheaper for business and consumers, and this will then lead to an increase in investment and consumption. This will help offset the decrease in output caused by the import ban. So the graph to the right shows the change now from 81 to 82, which is a shift to the right. It will increase, the aggregate demand will increase, and thus now the output will change from Q2 to back to Q1, which will now be Q3. So the output will increase and the aggregate demand will also increase. Now 3.5 asks us if the European Union Authority could use a single policy to simultaneously solve inflation and recession problems. The answer is no, not completely, because this would be challenging. For example, if we use the policy to solve the recession problem, which is an increase in money supply, and to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, which is from 81 to 82, the sky blue color, um, this will solve the recession problem, but it will worsen the inflation problem. So instead of being at P1, you can see that the price will be even higher than P2. Now it will be P3. Again, the light blue, the sky blue color. It will be much higher, making or worsening the inflation. Now, if we use the policy for solving the inflation rate, which is reducing government spending and increased tax, this will shift the aggregate demand curve to the left, which is this dark blue here, from 81 to 82 down here. And this will most likely solve the inflation problem, but then again, it will worsen the recession problem, since it might reduce the price back to its normal price from P2 to P1. It will reduce the price, but it will also decrease the output. So the output will change from Q1, where originally it was, and now it will be at Q3. So it will reduce the output way more than it should be. So no, there is not one single policy. Instead, the European Union Authority would have to use a combination of policies in order to balance both the recession and the inflation and not worsen either or. In summary, the import ban on Russia will cause a leftward shift in the short-run aggregate supply and an increase in price. The short-run effects would be inflation, decrease in output, and higher unemployment. A policy or solution that would be adopted to solve the inflation problem would be to reduce government spending and increase tax. A policy that would be implemented as a solution to solve the recession problem would be to increase money supply. Now, simultaneously solving both problems, both recession and the inflation problem, would not be possible since while we're trying to solve one, the other one will be worsened. So therefore a combination of policies would have to be implemented in order to solve both problems at the same time. Thank you for listening. This was Krishna Kach answering question 3 of the economics homework. Bye bye.
My name is Erandi Morales and I will be presenting on question number 4. In the past decade, the quantitative easing policy was often used by the major economies such as USA, Japan, and European unions to deal with its recession problem. These economies could no longer use conventional monetary policies to lower the short-term interest rate due to the liquidity trap in the money market. Therefore, they choose to use quantitative easing policy to lower the long-term interest rate. The main goal was to stimulate the economy by increasing aggregate demand. First of all, let me explain why an increase in the money supply cannot lower short-term interest rates. When short-term interest rates are either at or close to zero, normal monetary policy can no longer lower interest rate. This is called the liquidity trap, and it occurs when the interest rate is so low that increasing the money supply has no effect on lowering it further, thus failing to stimulate economic activity. This is illustrated in the money market graph by a flat money demand curve at a low interest rates, preventing the interest rate from falling despite increasing the money supply. This is how it is illustrated in the graph. So what is a quantitative easing policy? It is a monetary policy used by central banks to stimulate the economy when traditional monetary policies do not work or become ineffective. These are through the purchase of government bonds or other financial assets, to increase the money supply, to lower the interest rates, promote lending and investment, and to stimulate the economic growth. The quantitative easing and the conventional monetary policy are both tools used by central banks to manage the economy, but they differ in the following. So they differ in their objectives, their mechanisms, their effects, and the time they are implemented. So let me tell you how they differ in objectives. So the conventional money policy controls inflation, it promotes economic growth, achieving full employment and stabilizing the financial market. They do this by influencing short-term interest rates to affect borrowing, spending, and investment. On the other hand, quantitative easing is used when the conventional money policy becomes ineffective, or when there's a liquidity trap or economic crisis. They do this by increasing the money supply and lowering long-term interest rates to stimulate borrowing and investment. So how do they differ now on mechanisms? So the conventional money policy influences economic activities like the open market operations, the discount rate adjustments, and changes in the reserve requirements. And the quantitative easing, it injects money directly into the economy by increasing the money supply and long-term interest rates. They do this by purchasing large-scale government securities or other assets. The differences between the effects and time implemented of conventional monetary policy and the quantitative easing are that the conventional monetary policy affects short-term interest rates which impact borrowing and spending. It can influence asset prices like stocks and bonds, typically used to stimulate economic activity during normal economic conditions. The quantitative easing, it increases the money supply, potentially leading to inflation if not managed properly. It targets longer-term interest rates, aiming to stimulate borrowing and investment. It can inflate asset prices, potentially leading to asset bubbles. It is used during times of economic crisis or when conventional monetary policy is ineffective. And for the time implemented, the conventional monetary is implemented in the normal economic conditions for inflation control and stable economic growth. And the quantitative easing, it is implemented during economic crisis, liquidity trap, or when the conventional monetary policy is ineffective. USA's quantitative easing policy in 2008 to 2014. The post-2008 financial crisis was the worst period of economic recession since the Great Depression. The economies of United States and other large economies were in a very poor state and required measures that had not yet been tried before. However, the fiscal stimulus was complemented by monetary policy measures taken by the Federal Reserve Fed, the Central Bank of the United States, in the form of quantitative easing programs between 2008 to 2014. By the end of 2008, the federal funds rate was reduced to almost zero. This made them have limited room for further reductions in interest rates under conventional monetary policy. This is known as liquidity trap. This implemented new quantitative easing during this period. To meet these challenges, the Fed opted for using quantitative easing. So from 2008 to 2010, they purchased 600 billion mortgage-backed securities. From 2011 to 2012, they purchased 600 billion treasury securities. And from 2012 to 2014, they purchased 40 billion of MBS, which is mortgage-backed securities, per month. And this was the most extensive program they had implemented. So thanks to this, they had led to an enhanced liquidity in the financial system, which makes it easier for banks to lend out money, reduce the long-term interest rates, which makes borrowing easier for business and consumers, and thus promoting investment and consumption. So how does the quantitative easing policy shift the aggregate demand curve and influence output and overall price of the economy? The purchasing of bonds makes credit cheaper and easier for business individuals and households to acquire, and therefore it increases the amount of economic activity through business expansions and household purchases. Ultimately, this contributes to a higher level of aggregate demand, and despite introducing some inflationary pressure, this is just moving the economy back to a full employment level. So this policy increases the aggregate demand, shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2. As a result, the economy experiences a higher output, real GDP, and an increase in the overall price level, which is inflation. This graphical representation illustrates this shift from the initial equilibrium point with output Q1 and price level P1 to a new equilibrium point with higher output and higher price level, which are quantity 2 and price level P2. Why the quantitative easing policy increases the aggregate demand? So the quantitative easing policy increases the aggregate demand through several channels. The first one would be the wealth effect. So this raises asset prices, making people feel wealthier and more likely to spend. It improves business confidence by signaling commitment to economic support, boosting business confidence and investment. The exchange rate, it can lower currency value, making exports cheaper and more attractive. It can raise inflation expectations, encouraging people to spend now rather than later. It can lower borrowing costs for government, allowing increased spending on project or public investments. A weaker currency from quantitative easing boosts net export by making domestic goods cheaper for foreign buyers.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and I will now present to you the fifth question for the economic final presentation group. So, let's take a look first at the question. Here it says, Donald John Trump became the 45th president in USA in 2016. His economic policies were called Trumponomics. There were two main areas of these Trumponomics. The first one is tax cut and protectionism with high tariff. First, President Trump lowered the corporate tax from 35 to 21% in order to encourage domestic investment. Second, he imposed a high tariff on imported goods mainly from China. When Joe Biden became the 46th president in USA in 2020, he did not follow this Trump's tax cut policy. Alternatively, he called for tax increases on corporations and the wealthy people. So the first question goes, in United States, Republican Party follows the principle of supply-side economic, or so-called Reagan economics, whereas the Democratic Party follows the principle of demand-side economic, or so-called the Keynesian economics. Explain the differences between these two. So here I write the answers for that. Let's take a look. So the supply side economic or Reagan economic approach emphasized boosting economic growth by increasing the supply of goods and services, reducing taxes on businesses and high income earners, the regulation, and encouraging the investment. It argues that lower tax, less regulation, and a freer market will lead to an increased productions, jobs, and overall economic growth. The expected outcomes by this theory is an increased economic growth, higher productivity, and more job creation, based on the idea that benefits will trickle down all the levels of the economy. While on the other side, the demand-side economic or Keynesian economics is an approach that emphasizes on boosting economic growth by increasing the demand for the goods and services, including increasing the government spending, tax cut for middle and lower income earners, and even monetary policies to increase this money supply. It argues that government spending and investment can stimulate economic activity, especially during the downturns. The theory is that increased demand will drive the production, which can lead to more employment and economic growth. This also emphasizes short-term measures to manage economic cycles and stabilize the economy. The second question is, by following question 1, explain why Trump implemented tax cut policies while Biden implemented the tax increase policy. So here is the reason that I write. Let's talk about Trump's tax cut policies first. So Trump's policies were grounded more in the supply side economics. Well, by cutting the corporate tax from 35 to 21%, the aim of the Trump's policies was to stimulate economic growth businesses by encouraging business to invest more in the US, thereby increasing production, job creation, and economic growth. The idea of this Trump's tax cut is lower tax would leave these companies with more capital to reinvest in their operation, increasing the profitability, leading to more capital investment, job creation, and overall economic growth. While on the other side, Biden tax increases is an approach aligns more to the demand side economics. By increasing taxes on corporations and the wealthy, the government could generate more revenue for public spending on infrastructure, healthcare, education, and social programs. These higher taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals is intended to redistribute wealth and fund social programs and stimulate the demand by increasing disposable income for lower and middle income households, who are more likely to spend additional income. Thus, it will drive economic growth. The third question, as mentioned, the corporate tax rate was reduced to encourage domestic investment. How can this Trump's policy influence the market for loanable funds in USA? What happens to the real interest rate, net capital outflow, real exchange rate, and trade balance in USA? So here is the graph that explains the impact of Trump's tax cut on the market for loanable funds. So the red line here is the demand, the initial demand, and blue line is the initial supply. After a tax cut, the supply of loanable fund would likely to increase. So it will shift to the right side. As you can see here, the supply becomes the green line here after tax cut, leading to higher saving and investment. But as you can see here, the demand will also increase. The demand increased investment opportunities from the tax cut might raise the demand for loanable funds. And you can see here the real interest rate will also decrease as the supply of the loanable funds increase to here. So the initial real interest rate is here, and as the supply increases, the real interest rate will fall down to here. And the net capital outflow will also decreases because lower interest rate make domestic assets less attractive to foreign investors. Real exchange rate also will increases because lower net capital outflow means fewer dollars are exchanged for foreign currencies, and the trade balance will worsen because a stronger dollar makes US exports more expensive and imports cheaper. The fourth question. A high tariff was levied on imported goods and to reduce trade deficit of USA. How can this Trump tariff policy influence the market for foreign currency exchange? What will happen to the real exchange and trade balance? So here's the graph for Trump's tariff on market for foreign currency exchange. As you can see here, the blue line is the demand, and the red line here is supply. And due to the high tariff, because the Trump's tariff policy will reduce demand for the foreign good, thus decreasing the demand for foreign currency too. As you can see here, it shifts to the left, causing the demand to become here on the green line here. It become reduced, shifts to the left for the demand, and the tariff reduce the supply of foreign goods, leading to a decrease in demand for foreign currency as fewer imports are purchased. The real exchange will also will increase. The decrease in demand for foreign currency leads to an increase for the US dollar. And the trade balance that initially will improve because imports will decrease. However, in the long term, the strong dollar resulting from the appreciated real exchange rate can hurt the exports, so potentially it will worsen the trade balance. Last, the fifth question. Many economists oppose the Trump's tariff policy. They think that the Trump's tariff policy could not solve the trade imbalance problem with China. Explain why economists think that way. So here are the several reasons that I write that might be the reasons economists opposed to Trump's policy. The first one here is retaliation. Other countries may retaliate or impose their own tariffs, reducing the US exports due to high tariff policy by Trump. The second one is higher cost. Higher tariffs will also lead to an increased price for imported goods, reducing the consumer purchasing power. The third one is supply chains. Many US companies will rely on the global supply chains, and tariff increase costs for these businesses higher, potentially leading to a lower competitiveness and job losses. Efficiency. Tariff distort market efficiencies can lead to a misallocation of resources, reducing the overall economic welfare, and limited impact on trade deficit. Tariff alone are unlikely to collect trade deficits because these are driven by broader macroeconomic factors such as saving and imbalances. It also impacts the long-term impact of this tariff. Tariff may not address two fundamental economic issues like savings and investment imbalances that contribute to trade deficits and can lead to market distortions or even worse, trade wars.
Or you think that you can actually see everyone.